It was in 1964. I got a call from a friend of ours. His name was Václav Šašek, who just wrote a treatment. He submitted it to the film studio, and they said they would buy it if he can find a director who would direct it. He told me that he sent it around and nobody wanted to do it. So he asked me if I would direct it. And I was then a screenwriter, was not too eager to start directing movies. But since he was a really good guy and he just had a child and told me that he needs to buy new furniture, I said, okay, tell them I will direct it. So he did, and they paid him for it, and I forgot about it. 3 months later, the studio called, and they said, let's get together about intimate lighting. And I said, oh, all right. I called this friend of mine, and I said, get me that treatment. Because he asked me, do you want to read it before you say yes? I said, no. Do you need the money? He said, yes, I do. I said, tell them I direct it. And I probably didn't believe it's ever going to be made. Yeah. And so we sat down, we wrote the script. I remember when the studio read the script, they said, this is not a movie, but since you already wrote some screenplays before with Milos Forman, okay, we'll let you make it. The first problem I had to solve was, since it deals with musicians, am I going to use actors who cannot play any instruments and make them pretend that they play these instruments, or am I going to use musicians and hopefully make them act somehow? So I thought the latter was easier, and since we already used non-actors before, I was Milos Forman's assistant on his films before, so I felt confident that I can find some people who are musicians who could act. Casting a film with non-professional actors is the most frightening and most exciting part of making that kind of a film, because you never know where you find them, if you find them. I was with Mirek Ondříček in some regional school, and we needed the class and the corridors for that first sequence in Intimate Lighting, when they are rehearsing, the local orchestra is rehearsing Dvořák's violoncello concerto. And we were talking about that we should paint the walls a little lighter. It was too dark. And suddenly somebody was coming down the corridor toward us. And I remember I was looking at Mirek like this, and with the corner of my eye, I saw this guy coming, and I just reached for him. And I grabbed him, and I looked at him, and I knew that was him. And he was a director of that school. And I asked him if he would consider being in a film, and he said no. And that's what I like. I don't like people who are too eager to go in front of camera. So it took me a while. I would give him a script. Finally, I persuaded him to read the script. And when he did, I asked him, what do you think? His name was Karel Blažek. And I said, Mr. Blažek, what do you think? And he said, well, it's about me. And I said, would you do it then? And he said, okay. reluctantly agreed. And it still moves me when I see him on the screen, because I like to give like leading parts to actors or people who have certain aura of mystery about them. And Bamba certainly, Mr. Blazek, had that. And I remember throughout the shoot, I was promising myself that when I have time after we finished, that we'll sit down together and that I will maybe find out what it is. And I never had the chance, because 6 weeks after we finished shooting, he died of leukemia. And he never told anybody that he is not well. We could never tell because he looked fine. And but now, then of course, when I knew that melancholical mood he's constantly in worked so well for the film. But I learned what the mystery was. Stepa, who is Peter's girlfriend, she is Miloš's second wife, Miloš Forman's second wife, and who I knew for quite a while, because we met her first when we were doing audition, Miloš's second film. And she was a rock singer, very beautiful. So when I was looking for somebody to play this part, Miloš kept saying, "Why don't you give it to my wife? I mean, she's always waiting for me at home. She has nothing to do." And I said, "Miloš, I'm afraid I wouldn't have any respect. She knows me too well." And he said, "Oh, come on, are you a friend or not?" So I kept looking and I couldn't find somebody better. So finally I asked her to do the part, and she agreed. And she became a big star after that. I was kind of getting claustrophobic. I was shooting inside his house for quite a while, and I was looking for some way to get out of the house. And one day my assistant said to me, "I wonder why this mayor of town comes to watch us every day." And in communist country you are a little paranoid constantly. So I said, "Where is he? Which one is it?" And he pointed to this guy who was clearly mentally retarded. So I started to talk to him, and he said to me, "I can do all the parts better than your actors." And he was mimicking me, setting up the shots and doing traveling movements, and I said, "You really can?" He said, "Yes." And so I gave him like 2 or 3 lines, and he remembered every word of it. And he had this unusual ability to remember like 40 sentences. So we wrote him a scene, and I welcomed that, because it was suddenly such a totally unexpected element in a film. And he did everything as it was written, except that moment when he forgot the name Stepa, because he knew Miloš's wife as Vera, so he calls her Vera, and she says, "I'm not Vera, I'm Stepa." And he says, "You are Stepa, and she does, "Yes, Stepa." And that's the only improvisation in the whole film. The cinematographer was Mirek Ondříček. The Cinematographers Union didn't approve him as a cinematographer for my film. They claim that he didn't graduate in any film school. So there was a vote which everybody was against him being a cinematographer, except one person, Mr. Strecha, who was a cinematographer who was already 5 years retired. And so we went to him and we asked him if he would be the cinematographer, sort of covering up for Mirek. Mirek would be like his assistant, but that I said to him I would like Mirek really to do the film. And he agreed. And he was there with us, helping, saying, oh, Mirečku, you have a little bit, this is a little too dark there, and he would put and make a correction. Then in the middle of the film, Lindsay Anderson came from London, and he wanted to take Mirek away for his first film, because he visited us on Loves of a Blonde, Miloš's film, and he liked what he saw. So Mirek said, I cannot go because I'm in the middle of this film. And I said, please, Mirek, go, because you will never get this chance again, and Mr. Strecha will finish it. He was here with us. So that happened. Mr. Strecha finished the film, and after the film kind of made a little splash, he never stopped working after that. We were lucky at that time that there was no commercial pressure, and the political pressure was mild, relatively mild toward what it was before. So we never had to worry about commercial success. We never thought of money in any possible way. We were on a payroll. Every month the studio paid us if we made movies or not. And we got a little bonus when we made a movie. And there was a atmosphere that was much more tolerant toward art in general. Still not totally free, but as Orson Welles said, little oppression is good for arts. And I think we just got that little oppression. Films were banned left and right. But the films which we were allowed to make, many of them were critical of that regime. That was the function of art, in quotes, in communist countries, because there was no other representation of, the politicians were corrupt, and they certainly did not represent the opinion of the majority of people. And it was arts who took over that kind of a function. And obviously the film is the most obvious one. And so the audience responded to our films because they saw that our films dealt with problems they dealt with one way or another. It's hard to now to see it when you see, for example, Intimate Lighting, that the communists consider it dangerous film, and they banned it for 20 years. After the Soviet invasion, it was eradicated from the books, it was never mentioned, and it was like it was never made. Because there were certain subtle hints about that time, that political situation or economical situation. For example, how hard it was to have a house, something which should be quite normal, yes. Or Bambas is playing a religious song. There is a professor from conservatory mentioned who was in prison, things like that. And mainly, they even would tolerate if you argued with the communists ideologically, but they really hated when you ignored them. And this film, like Intimni, ignores them totally. And they didn't like that at all. It was like, where are we? You know? And what's funny about it is that when you see today, and people who don't really went through any experience with that kind of a political system are surprised. They say, why this film was banned? But people who remember that system, they know. We'll never forget the day when we showed the film to the head of the studio in Prague. It was like a custom that he would see the film, he would watch the film with us being present. We had to be there throughout the screening. He never laughed, not only laughed, he didn't giggle, he didn't make any sound whatsoever, which I understood as a sign of something unpleasant coming up. And when it was over, he turned toward us, myself and Jaroslav Papošek and the guy who wrote the treatment, Václav Šašek, gave us a long sort of a stare, and he said, you know guys, this might be the most boring film ever made. One of my goals was to make a film which people would go to see more times, the way we are visiting our relatives. Yes, we know what they are going to say, we know what they are going to do, because we have seen it many times, and we still go to visit them. And I felt, why not to visit the film, the characters in a film, the same way. And knock on wood, I think it probably happened, because I met people in Czechoslovakia, here in America, who have seen the film many times. And there was one veterinarian who claimed that he saw it 62 times, which is more than I did. One critic told me that he has a friend who is a university professor in Boston, and that he's manic depressive, and each time he contemplates suicide, he's looking at the intimate lighting.